Chapter 16 of Mystery at Number 6. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Elliot Miller. The Mystery at Number 6 by Augusta Hewell Seaman. Chapter 16. Mr. Tredwell Explains All. "Jerry," said Mr. Tredwell kindly, "I'm downright sorry to find you feeling so poorly. Please do not be worried about my visit here. I want to see you and have a little interview with you, I'll admit. An interview I've been trying to accomplish for several years. But perhaps you ain't feel equal to it right now. I don't want to take unfair advantage of you when you're ill." "Might as well have it over and done with," groaned Jerry. "I'm all in now. I'm done. Better have it over." "Very well, perhaps we had," agreed Mr. Tredwell. Is your wife about anywhere?" "No, she ain't. She went off to Punta Gorda this morning to see her folks, I reckon." "Coward," thought Bernice and Sydney simultaneously. "She just didn't want to face the music." "That so? Well, with your permission, I'll ask my folks to come up here on the veranda. It's rather hot out there in the sun and I imagine this will prove a long interview." Jerry nodded impassively, and Mr. Tredwell escorted the three others to the porch, made the introductions, and found them seats. Mrs. Conant occupied the only other vacant chair. Mr. Tredwell seated himself on a bench. Bernice and Sydney perched on the edge of the unrailed porch, and Delight went over to stand by Jerry's chair. It was a curious group, and upon it the weather-beaten old woman who owned the house stared out at regular intervals from windows and doors. As she was nearly stone deaf, so they afterward learned, she must have been thoroughly mystified by the whole performance. "Perhaps it'd be just as well," began Mr. Tredwell, "if I commence by asking you, Jerry, a few of the questions I've been anxious to put to you for some time past. You've been dodging an interview with me for a long while, but you needn't have feared it really. I hold nothing damaging against you. I only wanted you to explain the circumstances of having in your charge this, child, about whom there seems to be some mystery." At this, Jerry, who had been sitting with his arms folded and his head bent, glanced up uneasily, but he made no response, and Delight, standing at his side, slipped an arm across his shoulder. "Jerry," went on Mr. Tredwell, coming at once to the point, "was this child, Delight, left in your care by a man named Colfax?" Jerry looked up now in real astonishment. "No. At least that ain't the name he gave me," he answered guardedly. "Oh, then there was a man who left her in your care. May I ask his name then?" The guide shifted uneasily. "I ain't no right to tell. Give my solemn word. But you got me cornered. His name was Wyndham. At least so he told me. Harry Wyndham." It was Mr. Tredwell's turn to be startled. "Oh!" he exclaimed uncertainly, and then after a moment's thought, "Of course, I see. It's all right, and the same thing anyway. Now, will you tell me why you've kept this child hidden away from civilization so long?" "He wanted it so," declared Jerry sullenly. "He made me promise on his dying bed that I 'd never let her come near folks again. That I 'd keep her in the Glades always. He gave me money for her keep, not that I wanted it. I was that fond of her I would have brung her up anyway on my own. But he gave me money and said to keep her in the Glades away from 'em all. I don't know what he done that he was hiding from 'em, but I reckon he didn't want her to suffer after he was dead and gone for no crime of his." At this point Mr. Tredwell strode across the porch and stared Jerry straight in the eye. "What in conscience do you mean by that, 'for no crime of his'? Explain yourself." Jerry's stare was equally bewildered. "Well, if he had n't committed no crime, what for was he hiding in the Glades? Only fellows that are getting away from the law is anxious to slip into the Glades and stay there. That 's another reason I 've been dodging you all these years. I thought you was trying to git hold of his daughter to answer for what he'd done." Mr. Tredwell sat down heavily on his bench and mopped his forehead with a handkerchief. Then he smiled a rather grim smile. "Well, of all the misunderstandings," he gasped, "I guess it's time I told you my story at this point, to avoid any further complications. I might as well tell you that I represent the estate of a very wealthy family in New York, by name of Colfax, every adult member of which is now dead. 15 years ago there were 3 members living: the senior, Mr. Henry Colfax, his eldest son, Henry Wyndham Colfax, and a younger brother, Anson. They were a very unhappy family, whose chief disagreement was over the matter of money and the big estate. I cannot go just now into details, but the father greatly favored his younger son, Anson, who was of a particularly disagreeable and grasping nature, and seemed to have an unusual influence over his parent. Now, the elder son, Harry, was as far removed in nature and disposition as can be imagined from that of his 2 relatives. He was a deep student, interested in everything under the sun but money, and never understood his father and brother. He had married a wife of whom his father did not approve, chiefly because she was a girl of no money or family, and so, of course, an added thorn in his side. The older son would gladly have given up his interest in the father's fortune, except that he very much wanted money to pursue some scientific investigation to which he had dedicated his whole life. At length, however, the situation at home became so unpleasant and unbearable to him that he took his wife and his very young infant daughter and departed for Florida, announcing that he never intended to return. He had been there only a little over a year when I was called upon to inform him that his father had died, leaving the entire estate and fortune to the younger brother by a will made only a few days before he passed away. I inquired if he intended to contest the will. The only reply I received was to the effect that he did not intend to contest the will, that he was through with the entire connection forever, and that he intended to disappear from civilization at once, never to return, and wished no effort ever to be made to trace him. The affair was thus dropped, and concerned me no more for a number of years, 5 to be accurate. Then, quite suddenly, in an automobile accident, the younger brother was killed. As he was unmarried and had died interstate, it devolved on me to hunt up the heirs of the big estate. There were absolutely no immediate ones except the older brother and his child, if either of them was still in the land of the living. As the last I had heard of young Harry Colfax was down in the region of Florida, I began my search there. It was, however, a curiously unsatisfactory one. Harry Colfax had always been deeply interested in the Everglades, then even more of a mystery than they are now, and I therefore conducted my search in their vicinity. I heard many vague rumors about him, though he'd never been seen since his father's death. It seemed to be known that he had gone with a guide into the deepest depths of the wilderness, accompanied also by his wife and child. None of the 3 had been seen since, though some knew the guide had occasionally come out for supplies. But even he had not been seen for a long while of late, and some said that the man was dead, that his wife was dead, that they were all dead, even the guide. I could get no satisfaction at all, but as there was much element of uncertainty, I was obliged to return to New York, and the matter of the inheritance had to be held in abeyance. Then, 3 years ago, I happened to be down here at Fort Lauderdale on business, and heard a strange tale from a young school teacher in the town of a mysterious child who had attended her school, learned to read with wonderful celerity, but would never talk of herself or her people. She always came to school from the glades in a canoe. The teacher said it was rumored that she was in charge of the famous guide Jerry Sawgrass. At this point Jerry looked up with a startled glance, but he made no comment on what he had heard, and Delight appeared to shrink away from him as if in fear. Thinking I might be on the trail at last, I had Jerry pointed out to me one day